They tried to convince everyone that your love story was finished. But one emotional confession just destroyed that lie. For a long time, they acted as if losing you was something they had accepted. But when your name came up in a deeply personal conversation, their voice changed. And suddenly, the truth they had buried for so long came pouring out. What they admitted wasn't just about missing you. It revealed that a part of their heart never truly left this connection. And the final thing they confessed about you may explain why this story never felt completely over. Listen carefully. Because there is a reason your connection has continued to feel unfinished, even after distance, silence, misunderstandings, or time pulled the two of you in different directions. From the outside, people may have assumed the chapter had closed. They may have believed both of you had simply moved forward and learned to live separate lives. Your person may have even helped create that impression. They smiled when people asked about the past. They changed the subject when someone mentioned relationships. They avoided conversations that went too deep because deep down, they already knew where those conversations would lead. They would lead back to you. And recently, that is exactly what happened. It began during a private conversation they never expected to become emotional. Someone close to them asked a simple question about the past, nothing dramatic, nothing designed to expose them. But the question touched a place inside them they had been protecting for a very long time. At first, they laughed it off. They gave the kind of answer people give when they want everyone to believe they are fine. They said life changes, people grow apart, and sometimes things simply do not work out. But the person sitting across from them knew there was more. They could hear it in the hesitation. They could see it in the way your person suddenly stopped making eye contact. So they asked one more question. If it was really over, why do you still react whenever their name comes up? Your person went completely quiet. That silence said more than any answer could have. For several seconds, they couldn't speak. And when they finally did, their voice sounded different. Softer. Less guarded. Almost exhausted from pretending. They admitted that they had spent a long time trying to convince themselves that walking away was necessary. They told themselves the timing was wrong. They told themselves too much had happened. They told themselves reconnecting with you would only reopen old wounds. But every time they tried to completely close the door, something stopped them. A memory. A song. A place. An old conversation. A moment when someone else said something that reminded them of you. And suddenly they were right back inside the emotions they thought they had escaped. Then came the confession nobody expected. They said, "I don't think I ever stopped loving them. I think I just learned how to live without saying it." The room became still. Because this wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't someone casually remembering an old relationship. This was a person finally admitting that beneath every attempt to move on, there had always been an emotional connection they could not erase. They confessed that they had compared certain moments in their life to what they once had with you. They admitted that some of the happiest memories they carry still have your presence inside them. And whenever they imagined what genuine emotional peace might feel like, somehow their mind kept returning to the same person. You. But the confession went even deeper. They admitted there was something they had never told you before. During the final days of your connection, when everything seemed to be falling apart, there were moments when they wanted to reach out and fight for the relationship. They wanted to say, "Wait. Don't let this end like this." But fear stopped them. Pride stopped them. The opinions of other people stopped them. They kept waiting for the perfect moment, believing there would always be another chance to explain themselves. That chance never came. And for years, they carried the weight of that silence. They told this person that one of their greatest regrets was not the argument, not the distance, and not even the separation itself. Their greatest regret was allowing you to believe they stopped caring. Because according to what they confessed, that was never true. Even during the coldest period between you, they still wondered whether you were okay. They still secretly hoped life was treating you gently. And whenever they heard that something good had happened for you, part of them felt proud. Even though they knew they no longer had the right to stand beside you and celebrate it. Don't skip what comes next, because this is where the conversation changed from remembering the past to questioning the future. The person listening finally asked, "If you still feel all of this, why are you doing nothing?" Your person didn't have an immediate answer. They looked down, took a long breath, and admitted the truth. They are afraid that you no longer want to hear from them. They are afraid too much time has passed. They are afraid that the version of you they remember no longer exists. But beneath all of those fears is one even bigger fear, that they may spend the rest of their life wondering what would have happened if they had simply been brave enough to tell you the truth. And then they said something that completely changed the energy of the conversation. They said there is one thing they still have connected to you. Something they never threw away. Something they kept hidden because letting it go would have felt like officially admitting that the story was finished. But now, after this emotional confession, they are thinking about finally bringing that hidden piece of your past back into the light. And what it contains may reveal that they were holding on to far more than memories. The hidden piece of your past was not something valuable in the way most people would understand value. It wasn't about money, status, or anything they could replace. It was valuable because of what it represented. Your person admitted they had kept something from the time when the two of you were still emotionally connected, something they had almost gotten rid of more than once. Yet every single time they tried, they stopped themselves. They would hold it, remember what life felt like when you were still close, and quietly put it back where nobody else could find it. For years, they told themselves keeping it meant nothing. They said it was simply a memory. But during this emotional conversation, they finally admitted that explanation had never been true. They kept it because some part of them believed there might come a day when the two of you would speak again, and when that day came, they wanted proof that they had never completely erased you from their life. The person listening to them was stunned because your person had never spoken this openly before. They had always been careful. Whenever anyone asked about you, they gave short answers. Whenever someone suggested they might still have feelings, they denied it or changed the subject. But now there was no denial left. Their emotions had already broken through every wall they built. They admitted there were nights when they imagined what they would say if they suddenly saw you again. Sometimes they imagined apologizing. Sometimes they imagined simply asking how you had been. And sometimes they imagined saying nothing at all, because they feared that one look into your eyes would bring back everything they had spent so long trying to control. Then the person across from them asked a question your person clearly wasn't prepared to hear. If you walked through that door right now and asked whether the love was real, what would you say? Your person's eyes immediately filled with emotion. They didn't hesitate this time. They said, I would tell them it was real. Maybe I didn't protect it the way I should have. Maybe I let fear and outside pressure make decisions for me. But what I felt was real. And if they ever believed otherwise, then I failed them more than I realized. That confession hit them harder than everything else they had already admitted. Because suddenly they were no longer talking about what you had done, what circumstances had done, or what other people had done. They were looking directly at their own choices. They remembered moments when you needed reassurance and they stayed silent. They remembered times when you were trying to understand what was happening and they gave you distance instead of answers. They remembered the final conversations where both of you were hurting, yet neither person knew how to say the one thing that might have changed everything: I don't actually want to lose you. Your person admitted that pride became a prison after the separation. The longer the silence continued, the harder it became to break. A few days became weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, enough time passed that reaching out began to feel almost impossible. They wondered whether you would ignore them. They wondered whether you would be angry. They wondered whether you had already built a happier life without them. So instead of risking rejection, they chose silence. But that silence never gave them peace. It only gave them more questions. They started noticing something about themselves that they could no longer deny. Whenever people talked about unforgettable love, their mind went to you. Whenever someone described the person who understood them most deeply, they thought about you. Whenever they were asked what they would change if they could return to one moment in their past, they already knew the answer, but they never said it aloud. Until now. They admitted they would return to one particular moment between the two of you. A moment that seemed ordinary at the time but later became painfully important. They remembered exactly where you were. They remembered the expression on your face. They remembered how your voice sounded. And they remembered that you gave them one final opportunity to speak honestly about what they wanted. But they didn't. Instead, they allowed you to walk away believing their silence meant they had already chosen a life without you. That memory has followed them ever since. The person listening finally told them something they may have needed to hear years ago. You keep saying the story ended, but everything you're telling me sounds like someone who never actually closed the book. Your person didn't argue. They quietly admitted that maybe that was the truth. Maybe the relationship ended in real life, but emotionally, they never reached the ending. There was no true closure. There was no final honest conversation. There were only assumptions, fear, wounded pride, and words that should have been spoken but never were. And this is why every attempt to completely forget you has failed. They were trying to forget a story that never received its final chapter. Then something unexpected happened. Your person stood up, walked into another room, and returned carrying the object they had kept hidden all these years. The person sitting with them immediately recognized how serious this moment was because your person held it carefully, almost nervously. They said they hadn't shown it to anyone in a very long time. They admitted that whenever life became overwhelming, they sometimes took it out simply to remind themselves of a time when they felt truly known by another human being. And that person was you. But there was something else connected to this object, something even your person had avoided facing. Hidden with it was a message they had written long after the separation. A message addressed directly to you. They never sent it. They wrote it during one of the lowest emotional moments of their life, when pretending they had moved on became impossible. They poured everything into those words, the regret, the truth about why they walked away, the apology they never gave, and one confession they believed might change how you understood the entire ending of your relationship. For years, that message remained sealed away with everything else. But during this conversation, your person finally opened it again. Their hands began to shake as they read the first few lines. And when the person beside them asked what the message said about you, your person whispered something so emotional that even they seemed shocked to hear themselves finally say it aloud. Because the message didn't begin with an apology. It began with a confession about the real reason they let you go. And that reason was something you were never supposed to discover. The real reason they let you go had almost nothing to do with falling out of love. That was the part they had hidden for so long. As your person continued reading the message, their voice became weaker, because the words forced them to return to a period of their life they had spent years trying not to examine too closely. Back then, everything around them had become complicated at once. People were giving opinions. Family members were questioning whether the relationship could survive. Someone close to them kept pointing out every possible reason the two of you might eventually hurt each other. And your person, already emotionally overwhelmed, began listening to those voices more than they listened to their own heart. They started believing that walking away early might somehow prevent a deeper heartbreak later. But what they never understood at the time was that trying to protect themselves from future pain would create a different kind of pain, one that followed them for years. Inside the unsent message, they had written about the exact moment their thinking changed. Someone they trusted had told them something about you. It wasn't a dramatic accusation. That was what made it so dangerous. It sounded believable. It sounded reasonable. It was presented as concern rather than interference. They were told that you were beginning to imagine a future that no longer included them. They were told you were becoming tired of waiting for the relationship to become more secure. They were told that if they did not walk away first, eventually you would. And instead of asking you directly, they became afraid. They started studying everything you did differently. A delayed message suddenly seemed suspicious. A quiet day felt like emotional distance. An ordinary disagreement became evidence that maybe the warning was true. They stopped seeing you through the eyes of love and started seeing everything through the eyes of fear. Yet the entire time, you had no idea that another person's words were quietly changing the way your person interpreted the relationship. That was the confession hidden inside the letter. They didn't leave because they wanted somebody else. They didn't leave because the love disappeared. They left because they became convinced that losing you was inevitable, and they believed walking away first would somehow make the loss easier. But it didn't. It made everything worse. The person listening to the confession immediately asked the question your person had been avoiding for years. Did you ever find out whether what you were told was actually true? Your person looked down. Then they admitted something painful. Much later, they discovered that at least part of what they had been told was completely wrong. There had been a conversation they misunderstood. A situation that had been described to them without the full context. Someone had taken one moment from your life and turned it into evidence that you were preparing to leave. But years later, your person accidentally learned the missing part of that story. And once they understood what had really happened, they realized something devastating. You had not been preparing to walk away. You had been trying to protect the relationship in your own way. Your person remembered that discovery clearly because it happened when they least expected it. They were talking to someone who knew both sides of the old story. Your name came up casually, and then a detail was mentioned that your person had never heard before. At first, they thought they misunderstood. They asked the person to repeat it. Then they asked another question. And another. Slowly, the version of the past they had believed for years began falling apart. The conversation they had been told was about leaving them had actually been about trying to find a way to make the relationship work. The distance they interpreted as rejection had partly been you feeling hurt and waiting for them to show that they still wanted the connection. The silence they believed meant you no longer cared had actually been two wounded people waiting for the other one to speak first. When your person discovered this, they wanted to contact you immediately. They even picked up their phone. They found the place where your name used to sit inside their contacts. And for several minutes, they simply stared at the screen. But they didn't send anything. By then, too much time had passed. They were ashamed. They didn't know how to explain that one of the biggest decisions of their life had been influenced by fear, assumption, and incomplete information. They imagined you asking, "Why didn't you just ask me?" And they knew they would have no answer good enough to erase the damage. So once again, they chose silence. And once again, that silence became another regret. The unsent message revealed that this was the night they finally admitted the truth to themselves. They wrote that they had lost someone important not because love failed, but because communication failed. They wrote that if they could return to the past, they would ignore every outside voice and sit directly in front of you until both of you had said everything that needed to be said. They even wrote one line they had never shown anyone. If I had trusted what I felt instead of what I feared, maybe you would still be beside me. Reading those words aloud became almost impossible for your person. They stopped. Their eyes filled, and the person beside them didn't interrupt because they understood this was no longer just a conversation. Your person was finally grieving a decision they had never properly allowed themselves to grieve. But then they reached another section of the message. And this section changed everything. Because your person had written about something they discovered after the breakup, something involving the person who had originally planted those doubts. Apparently, that person had later admitted to someone else that they had deliberately exaggerated certain things about you. They claimed they were only trying to protect your person. But there was another reason behind their interference. A reason far more personal than anyone expected. Your person had only recently learned the full truth about it. And when they finally revealed who had been influencing the relationship from behind the scenes, the person listening to them went completely silent, because this wasn't some distant acquaintance. It was someone who had been close enough to know exactly which fears to use against them. And your person had just discovered that this individual may have known all along that you never wanted the relationship to end. The person who had been influencing everything was not a stranger. They were someone your person trusted. Someone who had been close enough to watch the relationship grow, close enough to understand how deeply your person felt about you, and close enough to know exactly which doubts would hurt the most. That realization was almost harder for your person to accept than the breakup itself. Because for years, they believed this person had been protecting them. They believed the warnings came from concern. They believed the advice was given because someone genuinely wanted to prevent them from getting hurt. But now they were beginning to understand that some of those warnings may never have been innocent. Your person admitted that this individual had always seemed unusually interested in the relationship. Whenever the two of you had a disagreement, they wanted every detail. Whenever your person mentioned something beautiful you had done, they found a way to introduce doubt. If your person said you were trying to make things work, this individual would ask whether you were really serious. If your person defended you, they would respond with another question designed to make them second-guess everything. At the time, none of it seemed obvious. That was exactly why it worked. There was never one dramatic moment where someone openly said, "Leave them." Instead, it happened slowly. One doubt. One warning. One carefully chosen sentence at a time. Your person remembered being told, "I just don't want you to get hurt." They remembered being told, "Maybe you're seeing what you want to see." They remembered hearing, "If they really cared, would things be this complicated?" Those words stayed inside their mind. And eventually, when the relationship entered a difficult period, every fear that had been planted began to feel like proof. Your person confessed that they stopped trusting their own emotional experience. They started relying on someone else to interpret you for them. And every time they should have come directly to you, they went to this person first. That was the mistake that changed everything. But the most disturbing part came much later. A mutual acquaintance eventually revealed that the person giving all of this advice had once made a private comment about your relationship. It was said casually, almost jokingly, but the meaning behind it was impossible to ignore. They had apparently said, "Those two are too connected. If they stay together, nobody else will matter as much." Your person froze when they first heard that, because suddenly several old memories began making sense. They remembered how this individual reacted whenever your person prioritized you. They remembered subtle irritation whenever plans changed because of you. They remembered moments when your person spoke proudly about your connection and this individual became strangely quiet. What had looked like concern might have actually been jealousy. Not necessarily romantic jealousy. Something more complicated. They may have been afraid of losing influence. Afraid that if your relationship became stronger, your person would stop depending on them emotionally. Afraid that you would become the person your person trusted most. And perhaps, without fully admitting it even to themselves, they began pushing the relationship toward failure. Your person struggled to say this aloud because accepting it also meant accepting their own responsibility. Nobody forced them to leave. Nobody physically prevented them from talking to you. The manipulation may have created the fear, but your person still made choices based on that fear. And that truth hurt. They said, "I should have trusted them enough to ask." The person listening answered quietly, "Then why didn't you?" Your person took a long pause. Then they admitted something they had never said before. Because deep down, there was another reason. They were terrified that if they asked you directly, you might confirm the thing they feared most. They were already emotionally attached enough that the possibility of hearing, "Yes, him leaving," felt unbearable. So instead of risking the truth, they accepted a lie. Because at that moment, the lie gave them something the truth could not. Control. If they walked away first, they could tell themselves it was their decision. They could avoid experiencing the humiliation of being abandoned. They could pretend they were stronger than they actually felt. But years later, they finally understood the price of that control. They lost the chance to hear your side. They lost the chance to correct the misunderstanding. And they lost the chance to discover whether the relationship could have survived the difficult season you were going through. The person sitting with them became emotional too. They said, "You spent all these years mourning an ending that might never have needed to happen." Your person closed their eyes. That sentence broke something inside them. Because it was exactly what they had been afraid to admit. For a long time, they had comforted themselves with the belief that the separation was inevitable. They told themselves that even if they had tried harder, the same ending would have happened eventually. But now they could no longer hide behind that explanation. Maybe it wasn't inevitable. Maybe the story didn't end because the love was too weak. Maybe it ended because fear became louder than love at exactly the wrong moment. And when your person finally admitted that, their emotions completely changed. They were no longer only sad. They became determined. For the first time in years, they started talking about what they wanted to do rather than what they regretted. They said they were tired of allowing other people, old mistakes, and imagined outcomes to decide what happens next. They said they didn't know whether you would forgive them. They didn't know whether you would even want a conversation. They didn't know whether your life had changed so much that reconnecting would be impossible. But they knew one thing. They no longer wanted silence to make another decision for them. The person beside them asked, "So what are you going to do?" Your person looked toward the hidden message again. For several seconds, they didn't answer. Then they picked it up. They folded it carefully. And they said something that made the entire conversation suddenly feel very real. I think they deserve to know what actually happened. But before they could decide how to reach you, the person beside them revealed something unexpected. Something your person had no idea about. Apparently, you had once asked a question about them after the separation. Not recently. Years ago. And the answer you received may have been another reason the silence lasted this long. When your person heard exactly what you had been told about them, their face completely changed. Because the same person who had convinced them that you were moving on may also have convinced you that they never wanted to hear from you again. Your person went completely silent when they realized the same misunderstanding may have been created on both sides. For years, they believed you had chosen to move on, while you may have been told they wanted nothing more to do with you. Two people who still cared were pushed into believing the other had already closed the door. And suddenly, the entire ending of your love story looked completely different. Your person admitted they could no longer hide behind fear, pride, or the amount of time that had passed. They said, if they were waiting for the truth too, then I should have spoken years ago. There was regret in their voice, but for the first time, there was also courage. They understood that reaching out could not guarantee forgiveness, reconciliation, or another chance. But they also understood that remaining silent would guarantee one thing, another unanswered question. So they took the unsent message they had protected for all those years and read it one final time. Every sentence carried the apology they should have given, the explanation you deserved, and the feelings they never stopped carrying. Then they added something new at the bottom of the page. They wrote, I don't know where life has taken you, but I never wanted our story to end through somebody else's version of the truth. That single sentence finally said what their heart had been unable to say for years. They were not asking you to forget the pain or pretend nothing happened. They were simply choosing honesty where fear had once controlled everything. And when they finished writing, they no longer put the message back into hiding. This time, they kept it beside them because they had made a decision. They wanted you to know that the love was real, even when their actions made you believe otherwise. They wanted you to know that their silence was never proof that you meant nothing. Most importantly, They wanted you to know they finally understood how easily a beautiful connection had been lost through assumptions and outside influence. Whether this truth becomes a new beginning or simply brings the closure both of you deserved remains unwritten. But one thing is no longer uncertain: the feelings they buried were never completely gone. Your love story may have stopped speaking for a while, but emotionally, it never truly reached its final page. And one emotional confession has finally proved that the chapter everyone thought was over may have been waiting all along for the truth to be told.